we need to figure out in their buyer's journey, what are the things that are happening a couple of weeks to a couple of months before they decide to make a major change on where they get outsourced data center support. And once we know those topics, we need to show up everywhere that they would tend to search for those educational resources on those kinds of topics. So when they go to Google, when they go to ChatGPT, when they go to Copilot, when they go to Perplexity, when they're asking for advice from their peers, from their friends on a social media platform like LinkedIn, what kinds of videos might they be watching on YouTube? What kind of podcasts might they be attending? What kind of conferences, what kind of events, what kind of resources? Where are they getting this information? How are they getting this information? What do they care about? So we need to make sure in those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision that we just completely saturate the surface area. So everywhere they turn, they keep tripping over our amazingly helpful content. So they want to spend time with members of your client-facing teams. Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, from data center operators like hyperscale providers, colocation operators, wholesale, edge and modular data center related operators, and then technology companies and facilities related companies. There's literally dozens of different kinds of those that sell to or partner with data center related businesses, as well as construction and real estate related businesses in and around data centers, digital infrastructure and critical facilities. And there are all of the investors, the venture capital, the private equity related companies, plus the outsourced sales and marketing ecosystem in and around data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. And regardless of what your role is on your go-to-market team, maybe you work in sales, marketing, account management, product management, channel partnerships, or perhaps you are the maestro, the orchestra conductor that's responsible for getting everyone in the right seats, playing at the right tempo, at the right volume to make sure that all of the brilliant, smart, motivated people on your team are rowing in the same direction, working on the same goals, and powering your company's growth. If this is the first time you are joining us, welcome. Over at DCSMI, we're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. So if you want to get notified about upcoming events just like this, as well as educational resources, make sure you subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your inbox each Sunday. You can subscribe directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So what's on the agenda for this week's Q&A show? First up, we'll look at how to get more data center and cloud infrastructure leads. After that, we will turn our attention to how to improve data center support lead generation. Next, we'll get into how to generate leads for data center site selection, land acquisition, leasing, and ESG facilities. That'll put us right at the halftime mark, where we'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. And when we come back in the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales Marketing and Q&A show, we will talk about how to find data center cable management customers, as well as how to get larger IT asset disposition, ITAD customers for data destruction and decommissioning. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, we'll talk about how to improve talent acquisition for data center cabling, connectivity, racks, cabinets, and power. If you have a big sales and marketing related challenge that you and your team are up against that you'd like us to consider answering in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments wherever you are watching and tuning into this week's episode. So, without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's first question, which is, how do we get more data center and cloud infrastructure leads? How do we get more data center and cloud infrastructure leads? That is a great question and a fantastic place to start. And the first thing we need to get to the bottom of is we need to understand, do you sell data center related services and cloud infrastructure related services to the exact same clients? If you do, it simplifies things tremendously, because then you can define a single ideal client profile, a single target account list. If you're pursuing outbound or account based marketing or something like that, you have a single set of buyer personas, customer insights to dig into to make sure that your content and events experiences are really nailing relevance and value. And you have a single buyer's journey. So the way this is worded, more than likely it is the exact same client base. So you don't need a separate go-to-market. You don't need a separate ICP. You don't need a separate set of buyer personas. You don't need different sales teams. You don't need different marketers. It's all one and the same. We're just doing a little bit of segmentation to make sure that we're addressing what is top of mind. So we need to know historically where your company has done best with data center clients and cloud infrastructure clients. And the way we're typically going to figure that out the quickest is we'll look at the case studies section on your website. We'll look at the reviews. We'll look at your logos. And we're looking for commonalities. And if we can find it there in public, client-facing, collateral, web enablement, product marketing, whatever you want to call it, great. If not, then we need to go into your customer relationship management, your CRM system, and we need to look at the last 10, 20, 30 clients that you've closed and which have been most successful. And what we need to understand when we look at that is what those companies have in common at the company level. We'll get into the individuals in a moment, but at a company level, where are they located geographically? Are you able to successfully sell data center related services and cloud infrastructure to every single corner of the globe? Or do you primarily do well in one particular region of the world or one particular continent, a couple of countries, a single country, an area within a country? Let's get realistic about and self-aware about where you win and where you retain the best geographically. Second, what size companies tend to get the most value from your data center related services and cloud infrastructure services? Can you sell to the smallest pre-revenue startup all the way to the largest Fortune 50 enterprise? Or do you need to get a lot more specific? In other words, is there a certain minimum size that a client needs to have to be able to afford your minimums? And does that kick in at 10 employees, at 50 employees, at 200 employees? Again, only you can answer that question based on the history of where you've done best, or if you're a startup where you believe others in similar businesses have done best. So that's the floor. That's the minimum size in terms of number of employees in your ideal client profile. What about the maximum size? Is your company really going to be successful selling data center services and cloud infrastructure services to massive Fortune 50, Dow Jones Industrial Average 30 kind of companies? Or do you max out at effectiveness or being able to win or being able to retain at a company with 1,000 employees or 5,000 employees? And again, only you can answer that. But in order to get crisp about solving your lead generation problem, we need to get crisp about who your ideal clients are. So geography, we have talked about. Next, we talked about size. And of course, in the data center related space, when it comes to size, you may be thinking of kilowatts, megawatts, perhaps even gigawatts. You may be thinking about square footage. You may be thinking about meters, square meters. The reality, though, is for most prospecting and most lead generation, you're probably going to need to normalize based on the employee headcount, based on the number of employees that a particular client has. And then the third area within your ideal client profile to think about for improving your lead generation program is to think about where you win most often in terms of your clients' industries, vertical markets, business models. Why is this so important? It's because when it comes to a lot of areas within data centers and cloud infrastructure, at the intersection of a geographic location and a industry, there is often certain compliance or certification requirements that pop up. And it could be across the board with all industries. It could be a subset of industries. But if your company, for example, specializes in healthcare or financial services or education or government, you know firsthand that there's certain investments that you needed to make in compliance and certifications and personnel and resources to be able to market and sell and service those kinds of clients. And conversely, when those kind of clients, if they were to accidentally land on your virtual or actual doorstep and want to do business with you, and you don't have those credentialings in place, that may be an instant disqualifier. So let's get realistic in your ideal client profile about where these clients are located, how big or small they are in terms of size, and what industries they're located in. Those three things alone are not going to get you to lead generation nirvana, but will actually put you in at least the top 10% of being a lot more crisp and clear about what successful lead generation, what intentional lead generation looks like for your data center related business and cloud infrastructure business. Once you have that ideal client profile, that ICP documented, then you're in really good shape to go out and build your target account list for account-based marketing, outbound, account-based selling, whatever you want to call it. It is a concerted effort at specifically marketing and selling and servicing anywhere from a few dozen to a few hundred, sometimes as many as a few thousand potential clients that look like externally that they could be a fantastic fit for your data center and cloud infrastructure related services. So you have your ideal client profile, you have your target account list. Now we need to zoom in and look at individual people within those accounts, within those companies, because companies don't buy, people do, right? Humans, at least humans for now. So when we look at the individual people within an account, we're going to want to determine the buyer personas that have the most important economic impact on your company's success. And a buyer persona is simply a target person that you want to sell to based on actual research and some select educated speculation about their goals, their challenges, their motivations, what makes them tick, what gets them a promotion, what gets them the opposite of a promotion, where they hang out online and offline. And there's a really good chance that if you have been in this business for a while, that you have some long-term employees sitting attached to your LinkedIn company page, on your About Us page, on your management page, whatever it is. You have some long-time employees, long-time leaders who've been with your company, who've been in this industry since the dawn of time. And because of that, they may have some really strong opinions about who your buyer personas are and what they care about. And it's good to go capture that data. But I would caution you that your internal input should be no more than like 20-25% of the overall research. Most of the actual research needs to come directly from the mouths of your prioritized buyer personas. How do you get that? Ideally, face-to-face conversations. Second best, video conversations. Distant third, phone conversations. And right around phone conversations, I would put in being able to use data that they didn't have to explicitly chime in and participate with. So in other words, if you can't get these face-to-face conversations or video or phone conversations, next best thing after that would be getting really crisp about who this buyer persona is and get a stack of LinkedIn profiles and take the same names of those 10 or 20 people who you looked at their LinkedIn profiles for and put them in a Google search or ChatGPT or whatever. And we're looking to see what shows up for this person's first name, last name, job title at this particular company. So we're looking essentially for their fingerprints, their footprints, their popcorn trail, their breadcrumb trail of what shows up on LinkedIn and what shows up on search engine results pages for this particular person. And with the LinkedIn profile in particular, what's really cool is you're seeing how they describe themselves in their own words, what they picked out as their headline, what they picked out as their summary about us information, what they picked out with how they describe their role at their particular company. And then you can go look at their activity and you can see what kind of content and events they interact with, what kind of comments they leave, what kind of groups they belong to, what kind of skills they're endorsed for. And what we're looking to do is aggregate this all together, get an amalgamation, synthesize what the consensus is on a particular buyer persona based on all of this research. And on the search results page, it would be awesome if you found a blog post that they wrote, a news release they were quoted in, a webinar that they spoke at, a podcast, an event, so you can actually listen, hear their intonation, see their body language. And again, you're going to wrap all of this together to find the consensus on the biggest goals and challenges for each category of these stakeholders. In many cases, starting with decision makers. That's your primary buyer persona. Your second most important buyer persona for data center leads and cloud infrastructure leads, that would be a secondary buyer persona. In big enough accounts, there may be a third category of person that you need to educate and build trust with. That would be your tertiary buyer persona. And if you've been doing this a while, you know there are certain kinds of stakeholders that when they show up, they are for sure not on your side. They're detractors. They're kind of the enemy of progress. Those could be a negative buyer persona. And the more aware you are of having a crisp definition of your ideal client profile and who your buyer personas are, and prioritizing your most important buyer personas, then you're in a really, really good position to start talking about lead generation. Because by default, a lot of people that have been in the data center industry a long time very much confuse the words sales opportunity and lead. A sales opportunity is a known person from a known company that's interested in talking with someone from your sales team. And at the end of that conversation, someone from your sales team can make an educated guess on a forecasted close date and a forecasted deal size. That puts you in a really, really early stage sales opportunity, in a really early deal stage on the deals board for your opportunity. That's very different than a lead. A lead could be someone that badge scanned by visiting your booth at a conference. A lead could be someone that subscribed to an email newsletter. A lead could be somebody that downloaded an ebook or a research report from your website. A lead could be somebody that registered for and attended or even just registered for an event, either in person or a virtual event. All of those are leads. They're not explicitly saying, oh, I'm ready for a free consultation. I'm ready to schedule a tour. I'm ready to book a demo. I'm ready to talk to sales. When they do that, they're considered a hand raiser. They're raising their hand and saying, I want attention. Now, there are certain instances where someone is in such a strong sweet spot bullseye for exactly who you're looking to do business with that you'll prematurely try to promote an early stage lead to sales contact to see if they're going to bite. But a lot of what causes friction internally between sales and marketing teams is a fuzzy definition, a lousy definition, lousy consensus on the difference between lead and marketing qualified and sales qualified and a sales opportunity. So I would encourage you to get that right after you've already gotten really crisp on your ideal client profile and who these buyer personas are. Because once you know who these buyer personas are and their biggest goals and challenges, then you can go about building a calendar for educational resources and educational events that allow you to educate and build trust with these stakeholders so they actually want to spend time with members of your sales team as opposed to you chasing them. This is incredibly important because we now live in a self-guided buyer's journey. 10 years ago, if I was talking about this topic, you would have known that about half of a typical sales cycle, about half of a typical buyer's journey was over before sales contact. At the time, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now owned by Gartner, found that about 56% of a sales cycle was over before someone was willing to meet with someone from your sales team. We had 10 years of digital transformation, a lot of baby boomers retiring, more Gen Z and millennials in decision-making roles, millions of people working from home, especially at the beginning of the 2020s. And we now live in a world where that 56% number has jumped all the way over to 83%. What does that mean? 83% of a typical buyer's journey is over before one of your prospects or future clients is open to having a sales-related meeting with someone from your sales team. This is a big, big challenge for a lot of traditional sales and marketing playbooks, but it's also a really big opportunity if you know what you're doing. What does "if you know what you're doing" mean in this particular context? Well, we can no longer just show up as a transaction hungry salesperson. We now need to show up as more of a consultant, as a teacher, as a subject matter expert, as a trusted advisor. Some of the more advanced, more senior members of your team may even rise all the way to the level of being considered thought leaders. That's the key to earning our way in, so we can educate and build trust with our most important buyer personas and stay with them throughout those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. So that changes the nature of what a lead is. In other words, a lead is the right person in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so that that lead sees one or more members of your client-facing team as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data centers and cloud infrastructure. That's the unlock to getting more data center-related leads, more cloud infrastructure leads that progress to great sales opportunities, and that progress to new clients, and that progress to new sources of delighted clients and recurring revenue and future promoters, because they get initial value, intended value, and extended value. And nearly all of that starts long before the initial purchase, long before you thinking about onboarding or cross-selling or upselling or retention or churn or anything like that. It starts way, way, way before that. It starts with planting the seeds. So this particular person and all of their colleagues that are on the decision committee at this particular client, this particular prospect, see your team members as the be-all, end-all experts on anything and everything having to do with data centers and cloud infrastructure for a company that does business in their location, that's roughly the same size as theirs, that's in similar or the same kinds of industries as theirs, and that where these stakeholders are in these buyer persona decision committee kinds of roles. That's the key to getting more data center and cloud infrastructure leads, is really, really investing deep, so that everywhere your prospects and clients turn, they keep coming across your fantastic educational events and fantastic educational resources that make them want to spend a ton of time with members of your team, that starve the oxygen supply away from them wanting to spend time with competitors to your alternative, that allow you to stack the decks in your favor as you frame the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the options in front of them, that keeps you on the short list throughout the full buyer's journey, and in many cases effectively knocks other companies off of that short list. So by the time they're ready for that sales related conversation, in many cases, you've already won. This is what gets you to get a much more educated buyer. This is what gets rid of price sensitivity. It leads to a more profitable growth trajectory. It allows you to recruit and retain the best talent, recruit and retain the best channel partners. And conversely, ignoring all of this gets you the opposite outcome. So if you are serious about getting more data center leads and more cloud infrastructure leads, take into account just how different buyer preferences are from as recently as 5 or 10 years ago, and make sure that your client-facing team members are showing up in the way that your prospects and clients want you to show up. Not how you want to show up, where you're trying to close like a car salesperson, but are actually showing up in a way that positions your client-facing team to be seen more like Big Four consultants, subject matter experts that are the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center, cloud infrastructure leads. This is a big culture change for a lot of companies, which is, again, the reason why your internal champion from your own company in many cases needs to start all the way up at the C-level or CEO level, up to about a couple hundred employees. If you're from a company that has a couple thousand or several thousand employees, more than likely a great internal champion for this kind of initiative could be your chief revenue officer or chief commercial officer or chief marketing officer or something like that. But it starts from waking up one day and realizing that we are tired as a company of being marginalized and treated like crap, by prospects and clients. We're better than that. We have amazingly smart people, and we need to let the ecosystem know about this so we can get in early with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, to be seen as the be-all, end-all experts on data center and cloud infrastructure related topics. What do we got for the next question? How do we improve data center support lead generation. How do we improve data center support lead generation? So we need to be really clear on who we're providing this data center support for. And when it comes to data center support, this will likely give you a very precise band, a precise range for the kinds of companies that would outsource their data center support to your company. Because really small companies, in many cases, may not be able to afford you, may not be able to afford your minimums. And at a certain size, at large mid-market, at enterprise, it usually becomes more cost effective and more preferred for huge companies to do a lot of the basics of data center support in-house. And they'll tend to only outsource to really, really deeply niched specialized firms for really, really nook and cranny kind of support that they just don't have the resources for in a particular location. So because of the nature of a lot of support happening physically in the data center, as opposed to remote support, that will for sure impact the geographic part of your ideal client profile. The size, as we just talked about, Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, not too big, not too small, will for sure impact the company size, the employee headcount range for what goes into your ideal client profile. And then certain industries, certain business models, certain verticals will have certain compliance requirements, certain certification, certain credentialing requirements that you and your company either have or don't have, that will dictate what kinds of industries are a great lead and what kinds of industries are a terrible lead or basically disqualified. So getting clear on your ideal client profile makes an enormous difference. Second, getting really clear on, in these companies, who do you need to build relationships with? Who do you need to educate and build trust with? And in smaller companies, they may not have as big of an upside financially, but it's usually a more consolidated, one person wearing lots of hats kind of person that you're looking to educate and build trust with. In larger clients that are still outsourcing data center support, you'll tend to see more of a split of different roles, different kinds of stakeholders that you want to build these relationships with. Depending on the nature of what your support is, probably data center operations, data center infrastructure, network operations, data center managers, and really, really small companies, it could be an IT executive or even a CTO. So again, the nature of who these buyer personas are and what they care about is going to vary tremendously depending on the size of the prospect, depending on the size of the client that you're targeting for this outsourced data center support. But yeah, make no mistake, there are clients that are too small to afford what you do. And there are clients that are so large that it's far more likely that they're going to provide a lot of the support resources internally, and they will only outsource very, very, very specialized niches, nooks, and crannies where they don't have the talent internally, or they don't have the talent internally in more remote, far-flung locations. So that will help you get a lot clearer on the ideal client profile. That'll help you get more clear on the buyer personas and how to prioritize the buyer personas, which has the most economic impact on what you do, which has the second most economic impact on what you do. In terms of leads, it's all about how to provide value to them. What do they care most about? How do we know what they care most about? Well, we need data. We need the words out of their own mouth. So getting this customer insight research right is incredibly important. Ideally, face-to-face conversations. Second most, video or phone conversations at the minimum. Study what shows up on their LinkedIn profile, what's in surveys, what's in their CRM, support ticket history, anything you can do to get information on what their biggest goals are and what their biggest challenges are when it comes to needing outsourced data center support. Once you have that and you've ranked those, then that insight will power everything that you do going forward with your content strategy and your educational event strategy. In other words, documenting these buyer personas in their own words is incredibly important before you ever write a single word of website copywriting for your website or your product marketing or your sales enablement or your outbound or your ads or your social posts, or the flip side, your educational events, your webinar series, your individual webinar topics, your live streams, what goes on YouTube, what goes on LinkedIn, all of this stuff is dramatically impacted by how well you capture their own words. Not what you think those words are, but what those words actually are, because you've taken the time to do the real research. That's one of the most important ways that you can improve data center support lead generation, is getting their own words. Second, it's recognizing that there is sometimes an extremely short buyer's journey when there's an emergency, but it's far more likely that when it comes to data center support, that they have a long-term relationship and you're trying to unseat the incumbents. So we need to figure out in their buyer's journey, what are the things that are happening a couple of weeks to a couple months before they decide to make a major change on where they get outsourced data center support. And once we know those topics, we need to show up everywhere that they would tend to search for those educational resources on those kinds of topics. So when they go to Google, when they go to ChatGPT, when they go to Copilot, when they go to Perplexity, when they're asking for advice from their peers, from their friends on a social media platform like LinkedIn, what kinds of videos might they be watching on YouTube? What kind of podcasts might they be attending? What kind of conferences? What kind of events? What kind of resources? Where are they getting this information? How are they getting this information? What do they care about? So we need to make sure in those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision that we just completely saturate the surface area. So everywhere they turn, they keep tripping over our amazingly helpful content. So they want to spend time with members of your client-facing team. So your sales development reps and your account executives don't have to spend all of the time chasing prospects, begging for meetings. No, you've flipped it. You've gotten to the point where your prospects and your clients want to spend time with members of your team because they're learning so much about anything and everything that has to do with outsourcing their data center support. And when you do this at a masterful level, not only will you saturate as many of those touch points as possible, but you start to starve oxygen and opportunities for educating and building trust with your competition, because they're learning so much about this category and how to set up the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the competitive options from your team members, that they have no time and no interest in going elsewhere for this kind of content, for this kind of learning experience. And because of that, not only is your company nearly guaranteed to stay on the short list throughout the full buyer's journey, but the value prop that you're delivering is so off the charts that you start to knock competitive alternatives off of the short list. So there's times when they get all the way to the decision stage and they're ready for sales contact, where the short list is a short list of one. In other words, you won. You're last company standing, and you're winning by default. So that's what gets rid of price-sensitive buyers. That's what gets people to hang on your every word. That's what gets you to initial meetings where they're literally quoting your own experts, where they've used your buyer's guide, your comparison guides, what they learned in your webinar series as the alignment tool internally, where multiple members from the same company have consumed your educational resources and attended your educational events, so that your internal champion's job, which, let's face it, account executives today, a big part of what they're doing is project managing their internal champion to get alignment across their own team and other necessary teams within the company. When you've done this at a masterful level, everything works so much better pre-purchase and post-purchase, because when it comes to support, the initial purchase is really, really just another starting line, right? We need great onboarding. We need initial value, intended value, extended value. They need to love what they're getting from your company. And that starts from that very, very first early stage interaction. So we need, for the great data center support lead generation, we need you to get found by the right people in the right places at the right time, as early as possible and as often as possible. And most of all, in the right context, so that your sales team is no longer seen as commission hungry, transaction focused account executives and sales development reps, but is instead seen more like consultants and teachers and subject matter experts and trusted advisors. This changes who you hire. This changes the kind of investments that you make in playing the long game with professional development, with upskilling, with cross-skilling, with cross-training. Enormously, enormously important. And this is coming up repeatedly in the podcast interviews that I'm doing with people, especially among data center operators and technology companies, where so many in these client-facing roles have such strong skill sets that if they were to hang out a shingle, besides being an account executive for a data center operator for a nights and weekends gig, they would all of a sudden have strong enough skills where they could be a fractional CTO for a small and medium-sized business in the area. And the SMB, the small and medium-sized business owner, would get enormous value from the professional recommendations from this particular individual. So if you're not there, recognize you're not alone, but you're also on borrowed time, because this is the new competitive advantage. This is the new leveling up. This is the new price of entry for being successful and competitive when it comes to being in the business of data center support. And if you want your lead generation program to be very intentional, to be a lot more successful with leading to the right kind of sales opportunities, the right net new clients, the right clients that retain and are great promoters, all of this starts with having a great perspective on what it means to provide not only data center support, but to be in the education and trust building business throughout the full life cycle, throughout the full buyer's journey. So those are my thoughts on how to improve data center support lead generation. Next question up, what do we got? How do we generate leads for data center site selection, land acquisition, leasing, and ESG facilities, environmental, social governance? So how do we generate leads for data center site selection, land acquisition, leasing, and ESG facilities? So this is in the construction and real estate segment, the investor segment of the data center ecosystem. So there's data center operators, there's technology companies, there's facilities related companies, there's outsourced sales and marketing companies, and there's this segment, the data center construction companies, which first cousin of which are the data center real estate companies, DCRE, as well as the investors, the portfolio, the hedge funds, the venture capital, the private equity firms that provide all the capital for these massively expensive projects to happen in the first place. So your company provides site selection related services, land acquisition, leasing, and ESG facilities. How are we going to generate great leads? We need to understand with these 4 different kinds of lines of business, the site selection, land acquisition, leasing, and ESG facilities, are they all one and the same clients? If they're all the same kind of client, then your job is much easier, because then you only need one go-to-market playbook. You only need one ideal client profile. You only need one set of buyer personas. You only need to worry about one set of customer insight. And once you have that defined, you're in a much better position to figure out the biggest goals that the individual stakeholders on these decision committees have, and the biggest challenges and frustrations that they're currently facing. Because once you have strong consensus on who your most important buyer persona is, who's the most important economic decision maker across site selection, land acquisition, leasing, and ESG facilities, once you know who this most important person is and what they care most about individually, what their team cares most about, what their company cares most about, in their own words, and what's driving them nuts, what's stressing them out, what's causing them to have a dysfunctional relationship, work-life balance, screwing up their vacations, causing their family and friends to not be very happy that this particular individual is constantly getting pulled in too many different directions, and vacations compromised, missing kids' soccer games and recitals and concerts and things along those lines. So with all of that in mind, to generate leads successfully and accelerate those leads into sales opportunities that close into new clients for these 4 different lines of business, once we know what those biggest goals and challenges are, we can set about building a editorial content calendar and a educational events calendar that allows us to position our client-facing team members as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center site selection, land acquisition, leasing, and ESG facilities. By the nature of how different those are, but potentially rolling into the same kind of client base, you will almost certainly have the need for multiple subject matter experts within your company to participate in this kind of initiative. And your company culture needs to welcome that opportunity, because buyer preferences have changed so much in the last 5 or 10 years. It used to be like 10 years ago that you were a lot more in the driver's seat. You could hold information back, and your prospects and clients would kind of have to put up with it. And because of that, you still got to spend about half of their journey, half of your sales cycle, with your best prospects and clients. At the time, CEB, the Corporate Executive Board, found that about 56% of this researching, comparing options, evaluating pricing, about 56% of the journey was over before you got to meet a prospect. That means you were still in there 44% of the time. Those days are unfortunately now very much in the rearview mirror. 10 years of digital transformation, lots of baby boomers retiring, more Gen Z and millennials in decision-making roles, millions of people working from home. And we now have the self-driven buyer's journey becoming the predominant buyer's journey, where typically like 83% of their journey is over before you even know that a prospect exists. They're 83% of the way of doing their research and comparing options, looking at pricing before they even get to you. This is a really, really big challenge for companies that are leaning really heavily on an outdated go-to-market sales and marketing playbook. But it's also a great opportunity for those that are committed to changing their company culture to being seen as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center, site selection, land acquisition, leasing, and ESG facilities. And the more you can embrace the role of repositioning essentially your sales team, your account managers, your project managers, whoever else is involved with these initiatives, to be seen more as teachers and consultants, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and perhaps even thought leaders, the better off everything works with getting in early, and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so you get out of the vendor box and you stay out of the vendor box. And this is especially important and especially potent when it comes to data center construction and data center real estate, because out of the 5 key areas in the data center ecosystem, among operators, technology related companies, facility related companies, and outsourced sales and marketing, construction and real estate has lagged behind. That's not to say that there aren't some great companies in this space that have fully embraced content marketing and thought leadership and webinars and educational events and lunch and learns and symposias. For sure there are. It's just that when you compare who were the early adopters at investing big in these kinds of initiatives, most of the data center ecosystem has been doing things for more than 10 years that a lot of companies in construction and real estate have only gotten to doing in the last couple of years. So by going all in on this, you can really truly differentiate your company in the journey when it counts the most, when all the preferences are being formed, and not just depend on being able to steal the deal away from a competitor in the 4th quarter of the game, in the 9th inning, in the 8th or 9th inning of the game, when so much of the brand buildup and so much of the brand damage or exclusion has already been done. A good way to think about branding going forward for companies in site selection, land acquisition, leasing, and ESG facilities, your brand is no longer just about your brand guide. It's no longer just about your logo and your hexadecimal colors and your font selections and your trade dress. Your brand is now everything that the marketplace says about your company and your team when you're not in the room. And given that by default, you're not in the room anymore for the first 83% of the journey, we need to work really, really hard to earn our way back in, so we have a relevant role in that first 83% of the journey. And that involves, again, being seen as the definitive experts, the definitive go-to experts on anything and everything having to do with site selection, land acquisition, leasing, and ESG at the intersection of specific geographic areas in your ideal client profile and specific company sizes, what's big enough to afford your minimums, but not so large that you're completely outmatched, again, in your ideal client profile. And for certain kinds of businesses, certain kind of business models, certain kind of verticals, certain kinds of industries. And the better job you can do with all of that, the easier it is to come up with remarkable educational content, with incredibly valuable educational content and educational events that wins over the hearts and minds, not only of just your initial contact of your internal champion, but gives that person a reason to invite in the rest of the decision committee to, hi, Bob, I see that you're registered for our Lunch and Learn next month on ESG best practices for companies that are looking to acquire land for data centers, whatever. Obviously you're going to customize this for your buyer personas. But when it comes to ESG and data center land acquisition, we know that it takes a village. Typically, people involved are construction managers, compliance, ESG executives, CFOs, board members. So with that in mind, who else from your team should also attend our Lunch and Learn? Simply hit the forward button, write a sentence or two of why this matters, and make sure that you're helping to get your team on the same page about this very important topic of ESG best practices for data center land acquisition, when there's still time to make a massive impact on the success of your project. You would be shocked that simple email marketing automation that you've been able to do for at least 20 years now, one, how few of your competitors are doing it. Two, how easy it is to set up that message and have it go automatically. Maybe it's a half hour to an hour's worth of work one time, right? And it's insanely powerful. And you'll know it's working because you look down at your event registration list, your email lead, your email notifications, whatever you're doing to track this, and you start to notice clusters of people from the same company registering together within a half hour to an hour of each other. And you're like, wow, this is amazing. I'm getting multiple people from the same company to see us as teachers, as trusted advisors, as subject matter experts. We're getting a chance to be able to educate them on how other companies similar to theirs have navigated data center land acquisition and ESG while there's still time to make an impact. And we're going to get out of the vendor box. They're not just going to see us as a vendor that can help them with data center site selection, land acquisition, leasing, and ESG. They're going to see us as the definitive go-to experts in this space. And wow, is that going to make a massive difference in being able to shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the other competitive alternatives in front of them. And when that's done well, it does tremendously powerful things for the future growth of your company. So with all of that in mind, in today's data center ecosystem, for critical facilities, for digital infrastructure, that's my insights. That's my recommendations for how to generate leads for data center site selection, land acquisition, leasing, and ESG facilities. So if you're getting good value from what we've talked about today so far in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button on whatever platform that you're watching this on. And if you have an idea for a question or a topic that we should address in an upcoming show, make sure to drop that into the comments as well. We're going to take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. When we come back, we're going to dive into 3 more questions on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey there, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry among critical facilities and digital infrastructure. And you're watching our weekly Q&A show, the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A. So next up, what's the next question for this week? How do we find new data center cable management customers? How do we find new clients for data center cable management? So your company operates within data center technology, cabling and connectivity, first cousin to data center infrastructure, first cousin to data center telecommunications, and you specifically are in the business of cable management. You probably also are placing these adjacent to and backing up into racks and cabinets. So there's a lot of interesting adjacencies within the other 21 companies in and around data center technology. We actually over at DCSMI have identified 22 different business models that operate in and around data center technology. So when it comes to data center cable management customers, there's largely two broad categories of data center customers you're likely selling to. There's data center operators. These could be like companies that are principally in the business of colocation, hyperscale, wholesale data centers, edge and modular data centers. The wholesale data centers probably not the best end customers, because more than likely who they're selling their wholesale facilities to would be the ones that would contract for cable management. So we have data center operators, and then there's data center end users. These are companies typically that instead of outsourcing, renting space in someone else's data center, have built their own data centers. And yeah, for sure, both the end users, the enterprise data centers, and the data center operators definitely need cable management. So where have you historically won most often? What kinds of clients have you been most successful with in the past? We'll likely see some evidence for this if we look at your case studies, we look at your testimonials, your reviews, we look at the logos, we look in your CRM system. What kinds of clients have you retained the longest, have the highest net promoter score? All of those will give us an idea of what kind of clients, what kind of customers you would like more of. And from there, to find more of them, let's get specific about who they are. Let's document, let's make sure you have a good single page definition of your ideal client profile, your ICP. Where are these companies located? For sure, when it comes to cable management, you're going to need to have geographic presence in close proximity to those data centers, or have someone that can travel to there. So it's either your own employees that can market, sell, and service the cable management, or perhaps you're using channel partners or some combination of the two. But yeah, geographic coverage definitely matters when it comes to cable management. Second, what's the right size? What's big enough that they can afford your minimums, but not so large that they would likely do what you do in-house? Again, that's going to vary individually quite a bit depending on the nature of your business model and your size and your capitalization. But let's get really specific on the range of employees, the minimum and the maximum size of employees, where you can successfully market, sell, and service your cable management related services. And then third, are there certain industries, certain business models, certain verticals that are a better fit for you than others? Once you have that in mind, you're in a great place to take that ideal client profile and proactively build out a target account list for account-based marketing. This could be as few as a couple dozen, usually a few hundred, in some cases, a few thousand companies that fit your ideal client profile definition that you believe would be fantastic customers for your company's data center cable management solution. These could be operators, any one of 3 or 4 different kinds of categories of operators, or they could be enterprises with their own data centers. Once you have that in mind, then we need to understand, by the nature of what you do and the nature of how big or small these companies are, who's the perfect person for you to get a foot in the door with. That would be your primary buyer persona that you would prioritize. Second most important kind of stakeholder in that company, second most important kind of person on the decision committee would be your secondary buyer persona. And depending on how big or how small their facilities are, and a really tiny data center or enterprise may be dealing with like an IT executive. Usually it would be something related to infrastructure or data center engineering or data center networking or operations or telecommunications. Or again, it depends on how they have organized their own team with who would be the best contact for you. But as long as your company is not brand new, you likely have history that tells you where you've been most successful. Then we need to look at a representative batch of 5, 10, or 20 different people that fit each of those definitions and get some deep customer insights about what makes them tick. What are their biggest goals and what are their biggest challenges? What do they need to accomplish with cable management in their own words that you could potentially provide expert insight on. And what's frustrating them most about data center cable management, that again, you could provide some best practices and some advice that would be transformative in how they look at addressing some of their biggest frustrations around cable management. And this is, again, going to vary depending on who they are, their particular buyer persona. But once we know the consensus and we're able to prioritize and know which one comes up most often, which is the second most important goal, what's the second biggest goal you hear about most often, and again, ranking those challenges, then you can set about creating this educational content calendar, an educational event calendar that allows you to demonstrate irrefutably, without a shred of doubt in that buyer persona's mind, that your company and your client-facing team members are the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center cable management for a company that's in this particular geographic area, that's of this size, that's in this kind of industry with this kind of stakeholder. And the better job you can do at demonstrating that, the more those stakeholders, the infrastructure, the networking, the NOC, whoever else is in telecommunications, meet me room folk, whatever is involved in the rack and cable folk, the low voltage folks, whoever is involved, the fiber folks, whoever would have an interest in learning more about data center cable management best practices for your kind of company. So your goal is to have these amazingly helpful blogs, podcasts, explainer videos, downloadable content, educational lunch and learn symposias, breakfast seminars, webinar series, anything you can that gives your ideal clients, those buyer personas and those clients, a reason to want to spend a significant amount of their 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision with your own company's experts. So by definition, this may mean that people that hold titles as like account executives, sales representatives, sales development reps, solution engineers, sales engineers, we need to make sure that you are helping these folks show up in a way that your prospects and clients see them as the be-all, end-all experts on anything and everything having to do with cable management. And the more consistently you do that, the more of those 28 touch points that you occupy, the more likely it is that you are going to, one, get out of and stay out of the vendor box. Second, that you'll be able to dramatically impact the criteria that your prospects and clients use to evaluate the competitive alternatives. Third, you'll guarantee that you stay on the short list throughout the entire journey. And fourth, by your prospects and clients getting so much value from these educational resources and these educational events, you will take away their reason to want to spend time with other companies that provide what you do because they're learning so much from your company. So essentially, you're starving the competitive oxygen away to the point where when they're finally ready for that sales-related conversation, you not only have stayed on the short list, but you'll in many cases have used this incredible value that you've delivered through educating and building trust throughout the full buyer's journey, that the short list is basically one company, your company, you won. So that gets rid of price sensitivity. This gets rid of haggling. This gets rid of all the demeaning, demoralizing behaviors that your clients play on your company because they've recognized that there really is no one else that can hold a candle to your client-facing team members' deep expertise on anything and everything having to do with data center cable management for that particular kind of company. So that's my advice on best practices. That's the playbook for finding data center cable management customers. Next question up is, okay, so this is for a IT asset and disposition company. How do we get larger IT asset disposition, ITAD customers for data destruction and data center decommissioning? How do we get larger IT asset disposition customers for data destruction and data center decommissioning? So what it sounds like is you don't have a problem getting small customers that need data destruction and data center decommissioning, but you want larger customers, which is fine. Just recognize that the larger customers may have more competition, more companies like you chasing them. Second, they may have a longer sales cycle, more financial requirements, more insurance requirements, more compliance requirements, but that's all fine. So let's get specific about who these companies are, what actually larger really means for your IT asset disposition company. Let's make sure that you're really clear and crisp on that ideal client profile. Where are these companies located? For sure, when it comes to data destruction and decommissioning, you're going to need physical presence in the area, either your own employees or contractors or channel partners. Second, what does larger actually mean? Is larger 500 plus employees? Is it 1,000 plus employees? Is it 5,000 plus? Is it 10,000 plus? The reason I bring up these particular numbers is those are LinkedIn's brackets. LinkedIn goes 1 to 10, 11 to 50, 51 to 200, 201 to 500, 501 to 1,000, 1,001 to 5,000, 5,001 to 10,000, and then 10,000 plus. So is larger 10,000 plus, or is larger anything that's 1,000 plus or 500 plus? Again, only you can answer that definition, but I want to make sure that you have a specific number in that ideal client profile, geographically where they're located and what larger actually means. Third, are there certain industries that are better fits than others? In other words, do you have certain credentials? Do you have certain certifications that or certain compliance requirements that you're able to meet that are unique to your particular company for IT asset disposition that others don't have? If so, for sure, get that on your ideal client profile. If conversely, there's things that you've shied away from making investments in because it's cost prohibitive at this point, it doesn't align with your business goals or who you're targeting. Again, be super specific on the exclusion as well, because there's some things that we're about to do with getting larger customers that not only would benefit from explicitly including, but explicitly excluding certain kinds of clients for data center, data destruction and decommissioning. Once you know your ideal client profile, you can build a target account list of companies that fit that. We also need to really, really clear on in those companies who are the stakeholders, the primary and secondary buyer personas that are most important for you to build a relationships with, to educate and build trust about anything and everything having to do with your company's deep expertise in data destruction and data center decommissioning. Once we have these great educational resources, downloadable content, on-demand webinars, offline webinars, in other words, like lunch and learns, breakfast seminars, webinar series, whatever you're going to do to educate and build trust at scale with these kinds of clients, then we're going to use a very, very powerful feature in LinkedIn to get those lead generation offers in front of the right people. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to get into Sales Navigator. And we're going to get into Sales Navigator and we're going to do our searches by company, and we're going to figure out who the individual people are within those companies. And we're going to make a concerted effort to, over time, build up our first degree connections with the right people in the right companies. Second, as we build out these first degree connections, it's a no-brainer that we should ask them to follow our page, but I want you to go next level beyond that. We're going to set up all of our educational events, our offline events, and our online events, like our webinars and live streams, to be listed on the LinkedIn events platform. And you're going to invite your first degree connections, which is, again, the reason why it's important to spend time every single week to take your target account list, to take your ICP, and keep growing the first degree connections in those companies, because it's more people that can follow your company page, and it's more people that you can invite to your educational events. So if you're starting to get the impression that we want these folks to come to the right people in these larger companies that are interested in asset disposition, data destruction, and decommissioning, to come to your great educational events on a very, very regular basis, so we can indoctrinate them, so we can really, really steer the criteria, stack the decks in our favor, and frame the different ways that they look at this category to really, really strongly favor our company's deep subject matter expertise. It's exactly what we're doing. So LinkedIn events are fantastic for that. Building up these first degree connections using Sales Navigator for filtering, setting up alerts, save searches, all of this tremendously powerful. If you want to do this even faster, in addition to using outbound, using Sales Navigator, you can also use LinkedIn Campaign Manager, the LinkedIn ads platform. And because of the nature of your going after larger IT asset disposition clients for data destruction and data center decommissioning, it's a fairly safe assumption that you're going after really large deals, really strong unit economics. And the US, these are probably at least $50,000, $100,000 deals, or your local currency equivalent. And because of that, you have a lot of different options in front of you for sales, marketing, and go-to-market. And one of the things you can use for sure to accelerate this is, after you have great lead generation landing pages, great lead nurturing, a great way to stay in front of the right people in the right places at the right time and in the right context throughout their full buyer's journey. Then it makes sense, in addition to your outbound, to invest some budget in ads. And the fantastic part about LinkedIn ads, LinkedIn Campaign Manager, is you literally can upload a list or manually set up a list of anywhere from a couple dozen to a few hundred or even a few thousand companies that you want to see your event registration information that you want to see your educational resources offers to generate leads against, to both for the initial lead and to nurture them and stay with them over time as you educate and build trust, to train them to know that your company is the definitive expert to go to when it comes to asset disposition, when it comes to data destruction, when it comes to decommissioning. So again, sales navigator, campaign manager, having fantastic educational content, educational events. That's the key unlock to getting to these larger IT asset disposition customers for data destruction and data decommissioning. I'm also a big fan of using podcasting, interview-based podcasting, and their first cousin, webinar-based panels, as another way to gather unique insights and to build deeper relationships with people that line up with your ideal client profile and your target buyer personas. Just be super careful to make sure that you're inviting people for editorial, educational reasons, and that they don't feel that it's just a bait and switch kind of thing into putting them into a sales process. But again, at the end of the day, it's super important for, in a crowded marketplace with lots of different IT asset disposition and data destruction and decommissioning alternatives with big deals at stake with these larger customers. It's really important for someone at the most upper levels of your company, in a lot of cases at your CEO, to say, you know what? We're tired of being treated like crap, like we're just another asset disposition vendor, like we're just one of interchangeable companies that do data destruction and data center decommissioning. We're better than that. We know we are the best. We know we're the best in this particular region. We know we're the best for this particular company size. We know we're the best for these kinds of industries. And we're going to let our target audience know about that in a big time concerted way. And these are big culture changes for a lot of companies that most of the time, for a small to mid-size ITAD company, need to start all the way at the CEO level. If you're from a huge company, then probably it's a chief commercial officer, or chief revenue officer, or chief marketing officer who's the internal champion on this kind of initiative. But it's going to change the nature of who you hire. It's going to change the nature of how you do onboarding, and professional development and cross-training and upskilling and reskilling are going to be incredibly important, because it's critical for your target buyer personas to see your client-facing team members as the be-all, end-all experts, the teachers, the subject matter experts, the trusted advisors, the consultants, and in some cases, even the top thought leaders on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center IT asset disposition, data center data destruction, and data center decommissioning. So that's how I would approach getting larger IT asset disposition, ITAD customers for data destruction and data center decommissioning. If you've been getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you have an idea for a future topic, a question or challenge that we should address in an upcoming show, please make sure to include that in the comments on whatever platform you're using to watch this show, this week's episode. And that brings us to our final question for this week. By the way, if you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational resources and events like this, make sure you subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. Final question for this week is for recruiters. How do we improve talent acquisition for data center cabling, connectivity, racks, cabinets, and power? How do we improve talent acquisition for data center cabling, connectivity, racks, cabinets, and power? That's a great question. And it's a fantastic one for recruiters to be asking, because facing commoditization, facing disintermediation, facing could a AI agent do better than a human recruiter, all of these things are for sure going through the minds of both your candidates and your hiring managers. So what can you do to improve both on the acquisition side of recruiting candidates, and potentially if you have a recruiting firm and you're not just an internal recruiter, but an external recruiter that does this on an outsourcing basis, what can you do to attract more of the right hiring managers that would outsource some of this recruiting to your company? What it comes down to is you're trying to let the industry know that you have deep expertise in finding the right candidates for cabling, connectivity, racks, cabinets, and power. And that doesn't happen overnight. Building a brand in today's marketplace is no longer just about having an effective brand guide. It's no longer just about things that are the domain of a creative director. Building up a strong brand at the intersection of talent acquisition and data center cabling, connectivity, racks, cabinets, and power, it's a marathon, not a sprint, because your brand is now no longer just about these aesthetics. It's about what the marketplace says about you and your team when you're not in the room. And given that in a self-directed, self-driven buyer's journey, you're really not in the room for the much of the buyer's journey anymore, it's incredibly important that we figure out a way to get you in early and often so you're seen as an expert on recruiting at the intersection of cabling, connectivity, racks, cabinets, and power. Well, how are we going to do that? For an internal recruiter, this is employer branding 101. This is having fantastic Glassdoor reviews. This is having interviews, ideally starting as video interviews and getting repurposed into text and in smaller micro content from employees that love working with your company and the benefits of them building their career at your company. For recruiters, this is almost certainly going to involve the external equivalent of that. And what I've seen a couple of recruiters, and when I say a couple, literally a couple, like less than a handful of the couple dozen companies that are active in data center related recruiting, what I've seen a couple do is start to have these great interview based podcasts. And one in particular recently did a salary survey, salary studies, a PDF of prevailing salaries in and around the data center ecosystem. So there's a number of different areas that you could potentially tackle to put a flag in the ground, put your stake in the ground, and let it be known among the data center industry that you have deep expertise in talent acquisition for data center cabling, connectivity, racks, cabinets, and power. But it could be as simple as saying, look, there's two different kinds of stakeholders for a recruiting firm that we need to be building these relationships with. There's the hiring managers who need candidates that are skilled in cabling, connectivity, racks, cabinets, and power. And then there's the candidates who are looking for great jobs, great careers at the intersection of cabling, connectivity, racks, cabinets, and powers. And a lot of recruiting firms, you may choose to divvy up those job responsibilities for who's dealing with what, which part. It's essentially two different playbooks, two different funnels, right? And with that in mind, you also need two different kinds of content. There will be some areas that for sure overlap, like the hiring managers and the candidates would for sure be interested in your salary survey data. But there's other kinds of content that will be unique to what hiring managers care most about and what candidates care most about. Trying to find a single content strategy that cuts across cabling, connectivity, racks, cabinets, and power. There's a lot of first cousin adjacencies to that for sure. There's companies that are integrators and distributors and consultancies that work across all or most of those five particular areas. But it's about way more than just segmenting into the hiring manager and the candidate persona. It's about developing this mindset that going forward, we don't want to be seen as a glorified middleman. We don't want to be seen as a headhunter. We want to be seen as deep experts when it comes to talent acquisition, when it comes to recruiting the right kinds of data center technologists, the right kind of data center facilities related folks that are needed for these low voltage cabling and connectivity, telecommunications, and rack and cabinets and power parts of the facilities equation when it comes to the data center ecosystem. And the way we're going to demonstrate that to the marketplace is we're going to show up early and often. And we're not just going to show up because we bought a booth at a conference or we sponsored something. We're going to show up in a way that allows us to demonstrate just how smart our internal team members are, just how much deep bench of expertise that we have among our client-facing team members. And going forward, we really don't want our client-facing team members to be known by their traditional job titles of like SDR and AE and CSM and AM. We want going forward for the hiring managers and for the candidates to see our client-facing team members as deep experts on data center career planning, on data center hiring. And the better job we can do at being able to demonstrate that early and often, so we stay with hiring managers and we stay with candidates throughout all of their 25 to 30, 28 different touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, the better off we're going to make it for our company. But Make no mistake, this is the new competitive battleground. You are selling to a highly technical, highly cynical hiring manager, and you're selling to an equally highly technical and highly cynical candidate. So it is incredibly important to work extra hard to build a platform that allows you to educate and build trust with them over time. So you get out of the vendor box, so you differentiate yourself, so you competitively position yourself in a way that really stands head and shoulders way above any other alternatives that they know about in the marketplace. And sure, social proof plays a large role in that. That's the reason people have reviews and recommendations. That's a lot of the reason why people invest in interview-based podcasts and webinar panels, but it is way more than just an individual tactic or an individual playbook. This is a cultural change for most companies where going forward, they recognize that in a self-driven buyer's journey, if we keep doing things the way we've always been doing things, we're excluded from most of the game. It's like, imagine that you're taking clients to a football game or a soccer match or a tennis match or golfing or baseball or whatever it is. And you arrive at the stadium, you arrive at the arena, you arrive at the course, and they say, "Can I see your business card?" And they say, "Oh, you're in sales. We have a policy where we don't allow salespeople until the end of the game because they're too pushy. They're too obnoxious. We have a bias. We're really sales allergic." And you'd be like, "That's ridiculous. We spent $50,000 to sponsor this game. You're going to let us in?" But just recognize that this is essentially what's going on in the self-driven buyer's journey, where people are just asking tons of questions on search and on their LLM chat tools and of their personal assistants and of their peers on social media. By the time you get to a meeting with a hiring manager or a candidate, there's a really good chance that they're going to know more than your entry-level hires on your team. Let that sink in for a minute. Some of the hiring managers and the candidates that come to you, by the time they get to you, may actually know more about the job market than your recently hired team members that have only been working with you for a couple of months or several months. And that's an enormous problem because no one needs you to read your website or read slides to them anymore. In fact, if you do that, there's an excellent chance that they're going to immediately shut down and walk out. So the question is, how can you provide value as more of a teacher, as more of a consultant, as more of a trusted advisor? Well, it's going next level on deep customer insight. It's figuring out a way to add value in a way that's way, way, way beyond what you ever have before in your career, because this is the new competitive battleground. And it's not just your direct competitors, it's indirect competitors. Indirect competitors means they're typically a lot larger of a company or a lot smaller of a company than yours, or they operate in a different geographic market than yours. But in the highly geographically connected world that we live in, 7/24 world that we live in, geographic boundaries have largely melted away. So you're facing new opportunities and new competitors that are very different than you did as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. And also, don't forget that there's all kinds of media and events companies that create a ton of great content and educational experiences about your topic. And you're also competing for attention with them. So with that, all of that in mind, how is your company going to create a world-class educational experience when it comes to anything and everything having to do with talent acquisition for data center cabling, connectivity, racks, cabinets, and power? Again, this is a very, very important cultural and strategic issue that you're going to navigate if you want to stay relevant going forward to how hiring managers and candidates are researching and ultimately making their decisions on who to go with. So the choice is yours. Essentially, do you want to bury your head in the sand and pretend like it's still 10 or 20 years ago when you know that the overwhelming majority, like 85, 90% of companies don't buy the way they did 10 or 20 years ago? Or are you going to live in the present and recognize that the world has changed? And if you want to protect your company and protect your career from being disrupted, these are just the table stakes going forward. So if you're serious about improving talent acquisition for data center cabling, connectivity, racks, cabinets, and power, that's the playbook. So that's the final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. If you got good value from this week's episode, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you have a topic that you think we ought to address in an upcoming episode of Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, make sure to drop that in the comments. Until next time, I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, mention that you watch the show, send me a connect invite. I'd love to be connected with you as well. And we look forward to seeing you back again next time. We wish you great success in elevating your role, your team's impact, and your company's impact in the growth of data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. Take care now.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.